Welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we carry on with part 2 of our look at the months of October, November, and December 1974. This time we'll be talking about fourth quarter television and news, plus we'll take a look at best-selling books in 1974. Let's get started by wrapping up the look at music that we started last time with notable new album releases. And kicking off the quarter on October 1st comes Butterfly by Barbra Streisand, which will peak at number 13 on January 4th, 1975. Also released that day is Barry Manilow 2. This will begin climbing the chart early in 1975 after he begins having hits with Mandy and It's a Miracle. It'll go to number 9 on February 22nd. And released on October 4th is John Lennon's Walls and Bridges album. The album receives a big promotional push from the Listen to This campaign, which includes, among other things, t-shirts, this is a reproduction, buttons, keychains, bumper stickers, and a kind of a weird one, a sewing kit with needle and thread. They call it a mending packet. There was also a Listen to This television commercial narrated by Ringo Starr. I can understand why Plastic Ono Band and Imagine are the critical favorites, but this is the John Lennon album that I enjoy the most. Plus, it includes the beautiful Number 9 Dream, which is probably my all-time favorite John Lennon solo track. It'll reach number 1 on November 16th. Also released on October 4th is Smiler by Rod Stewart, which among other things includes a track written by Paul McCartney and one written by Elton John and Bernie Taupin. It'll go to number 13 on November 30th. Also released that day is Odds and Sods by The Who. It's a collection of previously unreleased tracks from over the course of their career. It works as kind of a placeholder for the band while various members are busy working on Ken Russell's upcoming film of Tommy, which is due for release in the new year. Naturally, it's the more recent tracks, like the group's version of Pure and Easy, Put the Money Down, and Long Live Rock, that get the bulk of the play on FM radio. It'll spend 2 weeks at number 15, beginning November 30th. Released on October 14th is War Child by Jethro Tull, and This Is the Moody Blues, a double best-of collection ahead of the holidays. It'll reach number 11 on January 4th. On October 16th, the Rolling Stones are back with a new album, It's Only Rock and Roll. The cover is by artist Guy Pollart, whose illustrations were featured in the 1973 book Rock Dreams. Famously, early in 1974, Mick Jagger is supposed to have told David Bowie that the Stones had hired Pollart to do their next album cover. With his own album nearly ready, Bowie quickly hired Pollart to do the cover for Diamond Dogs, which came out in May. By the time the Stones album is released, it looks to most people like they're following Bowie's lead by having Pollart do their cover. The Stones won't be touring to support the album. Instead, as they'd done for Goat's Head Soup just over a year earlier, they produced promotional films for some of the songs, which are broadcast on the late-night music show Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. To promote the album, they make films for Till the Next Goodbye, their cover of The Temptations' Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and most memorably, the title track, It's Only Rock and Roll, with sailor suits and soap suds. The clips are broadcast on the October 19th show shortly after the album is released. Helen Reddy's Free and Easy album is released on October 22nd. On October 29th, just in time for the holidays, comes David Live, a double live set recorded at the Tower Theater outside Philadelphia on the still continuing Diamond Dogs tour. This will go to number 8 on November 30th. Just after the tour wraps, Bowie will be seen on the December 4th episode of ABC's Wide World Special, The Dick Cavett Show. With his band, he'll perform 1984 and preview a new song, Young Americans. After an interview during which he's clearly very ill at ease, he'll play another new number, an updated cover of the Flares' 1961 hit, Foot Stompin'. It features a distinctive new guitar riff by Carlos Alomar. In January, John Lennon will visit Bowie at Ladyland Studios in New York, where Bowie, Lennon, and Alomar will turn the riff into a completely different song called Fame. More about that when we get to 1975. By the way, during the interview portion, Bowie admits that he nicked the idea of having Guy Pollart do the cover of Diamond Dogs from Mick Jagger. Also released in October is Motherlode by Loggins and Messina, and Sun Goddess by Ramsey Lewis, which will go to number 12 on March 29th, 1975. Also released in October is Al Green Explores Your Mind. This will go to number 15 on January 4th. And coming on November 8th is a big hits release ahead of the holidays, Elton John's Greatest Hits. I'm sure this was under a lot of Christmas trees in 1974. Also released that day is Sheer Heart Attack by Queen. This won't get much attention at first, but it will eventually go to number 12 for 2 weeks, beginning May 10th, 1975, after Killer Queen becomes their first U.S. hit. Released on November 15th is Goodnight Vienna by Ringo Starr. It follows the template established a year earlier with the Ringo album of having many big-name support musicians, in this case including Harry Nilsson, Dr. John, Billy Preston, Robbie Robertson, Elton John. John Lennon contributed the title track as well as the backing track for the hit single Only You. Like Ringo had done for Walls and Bridges, John Lennon narrates a television commercial for Ringo's album. Goodnight Vienna doesn't have quite the extensive catalog of promotional items that Walls and Bridges had, but there are a few things like this sticker with the phrase Klaatu Barada Nikto from the 1951 film The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is the basis of the album artwork. After years on the scene, Linda Ronstadt will finally break through in a big way with her album Heart Like a Wheel, released on November 19th. This will go to number 1 on February 15th, 1975. Released on November 28th is Relayer by Yes, which will go to number 5 on February 1st. Also released in November, Fire by the Ohio Players, a double live set from Joni Mitchell ahead of the holidays, Miles of Isles, which will go to number 2 on February 8th, Do It Till You're Satisfied by BT Express, which will go to number 5 on March 1st, a holiday hits package for Three Dog Night, Joy to the World, their greatest hits. This will go to number 15 on February 22nd. Also released in November, but taking a while to catch on, is Five Aside, an Ace album. This will eventually go to number 11 on May 31st, 1975, after their single How Long becomes a major hit. And on December 5th, Rufus were already back with the new album Rufusized. This will go to number 7 on March 1st. And on December 9th, George Harrison's Dark Horse album. The album George was touring to support is released more than 5 weeks after the tour began and only 11 days before its scheduled end. Yet another problem for George's ill-fated U.S. tour. The album receives probably the most negative reviews of any regular album by a Beatle up to this point. Rolling Stone calls it a disastrous album to match a disastrous tour. Many of the songs are weak, and George was already suffering from laryngitis when the album was recorded, which is evident in his vocals. Later reviews have been kinder, and it does feature some good songs like Far East Man and the title track. I really like So Sad as well. Like John and Ringo's albums, it's hyped with some promotional items like Buttons, and the public liked the album, pushing it to number 4 on the chart on January 25th, 1975. Released on December 14th is Joe Walsh's album So What. It'll go to number 11 on March 22nd. Also released in December is New and Improved by the Spinners, which will go to number 9 on February 8th. And All the Girls in the World Beware by Grand Funk, which will go to number 10 on February 22nd. Turning to television in the fourth quarter, on October 6th, PBS stations begin airing Monty Python's Flying Circus in the U.S. 5 years after it began, and just as its original run on the BBC is coming to an end. It wasn't absolutely the first time Monty Python had appeared on American TV. For example, I remember seeing them on a short-run series called The Marty Feldman Comedy Machine in the spring of 1972. Every week, Feldman would introduce a clip from the show. I remember they showed Flying Sheep, The Mouse Problem, and The Lethal Joke, among others. Unlike most television comedy, which was predictable and amusing, Monty Python was actually laugh-out-loud hysterically funny. When The Flying Circus finally arrived on PBS, I had already been wanting to see it for 2.5 years. Kind of ironically, being the channel of highbrow, artistically valuable, adult-oriented content, PBS can air the episodes unedited, which would never have been possible on U.S. commercial networks in 1974. Naturally, the predictions it will never catch on with American audiences are quickly proven wrong, and it becomes the most popular show on the PBS network. Over the next few years, terms like, and now for something completely different, this is an ex-parrot, and nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition will start being rolled out across the USA. On October 28th, Rhoda Morgenstern marries Joe Girard in a much-hyped hour-long special episode of Rhoda that, for a while, will hold the record for the highest-rated TV episode of the 70s. Of course, the cast of The Mary Tyler Moore Show appear as wedding guests. It'll draw an audience of 52 million, with some viewers holding wedding parties on the night of the show. CBS reported receiving actual wedding presents for the fictional couple. According to an article in Vogue magazine, people on the road had pulled over and checked into motel rooms just to watch the show. It was only the 8th episode of the series. Rhoda will stay a massive ratings winner through its second season, but behind the scenes it was felt that CBS had pressured them to do the wedding too early in the run, and they had wasted an opportunity to do more dating episodes. Season 2 will concentrate on Rhoda and Joe as newlyweds, but as so often happens on TV shows, once a couple is together, the only thing left to do is to break them up. Joe and Rhoda will separate at the beginning of Season 3, which will be poorly received by audiences and the ratings will plummet. After finishing its second season at number 7 in the ratings, Rhoda will finish Season 3 in 33rd place. And on Wednesday, December 4th, comes Tony Orlando and Dawn. With their summer variety series having done well in the ratings, CBS now brings them back as a mid-season replacement. Technically, it's replacing the failed new series Sons and Daughters. In a broader sense, it's replacing the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour, which had held the same opening slot on CBS Wednesdays until the couple had split in the spring. Format-wise, it's almost identical to the Sonny and Cher show. Tony Orlando and Dawn will be a moderate hit and run until the end of 1976. As we begin winding up 1974, let's take a look at some of the year's best-selling books. As we'll see, American history from early to very recent seemed to be very much on people's minds. It might have had to do with the upcoming bicentennial. It was also easy to interpret that the events of Watergate had people re-examining America's meaning and place in the world. Alistair Cook's America had been the #1 nonfiction bestseller for the last 4 weeks of 1973 and the first 5 weeks of 1974. The book was a tie-in to the acclaimed 13-part television documentary, America, A Personal History of the United States. The BBC series had first aired in the U.S. on NBC in late 1972 and early 1973. It was being repeated on PBS from September 1974 to March 1975. Plain Speaking, an oral biography of Harry S. Truman, Merle Miller's book on the recently passed former president, was #1 for 9 weeks beginning February 24th and again for 2 more weeks beginning May 5th. Times to Remember, a memoir by Kennedy family matriarch Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, was #1 for 6 weeks beginning May 19th. All the President's Men was #1 for 20 weeks from June 30th to November 10th during the height of Watergate and for months afterward. It was by Woodward and Bernstein, whose investigative reporting for the Washington Post had been central to unraveling the scandal. Ending the year on a different note was All Things Bright and Beautiful by James Herriot. The sequel to All Creatures Great and Small continues Herriot's adventures as a Yorkshire veterinarian. It'll be #1 for the last 7 weeks of 1974 and the first 4 of 1975. Bestsellers in fiction include Burr by Gore Vidal, a historical fiction novel re-examining the founding of the United States. It had been #1 for the last 4 weeks of 1973 and the first 17 weeks of 1974. Also popular was Watership Down by Richard Adams. It was the story of a group of anthropomorphized rabbits. It was #1 for 13 weeks beginning May 5th after Burr. The espionage thriller Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy by John le Carré was #1 for 10 weeks beginning August 4th after Watership Down. Centennial by James A. Michener traces northeastern Colorado from prehistory to the present through the fictional town of Centennial. It went to #1 on October 13th and will stay there for the last 12 weeks of 1974 and 16 of the first 17 weeks of 1975. Jaws by Peter Benchley is a hugely popular tense adventure novel about a great white shark menacing a Long Island resort community. And published in September was Joseph Heller's follow-up to Catch-22, Something Happened. It's a stream of consciousness narrative about the life of a businessman who thinks he's losing his mind. It won't do as well as Catch-22, of course, but it will still be one of the year's bestsellers. And in news in the fourth quarter, on October 8th, in a televised address, the new president, Gerald Ford, addresses a joint session of Congress on the problem of rampant inflation, which had recently reached 12%. In an effort to move past Watergate and galvanize the public in a common cause, he urges us to whip inflation now. Unfortunately, the only concrete suggestion that he seemed to have for us was to write in and order a button with the acronym WIN on it. And I did just that. In January, I received this envelope with the White House return address and a postmark of January 21st, 1975. And here's what was in the envelope. There was the WIN button. It's really not so much a button as a tab that you would fold over on your lapel or your shirt pocket. There was a facsimile letter from the President of the United States, reading in part, "May I thank you personally for enrolling as an inflation fighter and energy saver for the duration. Jerry Ford." And there were two flyers, both by Virginia H. Knopfer, Special Assistant to the President for Consumer Affairs, one about fighting inflation and one about saving energy. There are 10 suggestions on each, including on the one for fighting inflation, use credit wisely, hunt for bargains, buy the cheaper item and then brag about being a bargain hunter, and number 10 is guard your health. The energy saving flyer had such recommendations as keep your thermostat set to 68 during the day and 60 at night. Close off and seal off and do not heat any unoccupied rooms, and only run your washer and dryer with full loads. I don't know how much good it did, but I did write in for the stuff and held on to it. What it really seemed to do was just sort of reinforce how little impact and control anybody had over rising prices. On October 30th, having been rescheduled, world heavyweight boxing champion George Foreman meets former champ Muhammad Ali in Kinshasa, Zaire, in a fight dubbed the Rumble in the Jungle. The hugely promoted event is, at the time, reportedly the most watched live television broadcast in history. Ali knocks out the previously undefeated Foreman in the 8th round, regaining the title that had been stripped from him in 1967 for his refusal to serve in the military. And on December 26th, legendary comedian Jack Benny passes away at the age of 80. He had been a mainstay of American entertainment on radio and television since the 1930s. And that'll do it for this time. Please join me next week when we will wrap up 1974 with a very busy fourth quarter in movies, busy fourth quarter for the Beach Boys, and we'll take a look at the year-end record chart. Meanwhile, hope you enjoyed this. As always, I look forward to your comments and feedback. Please hit like if you don't mind, subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.